April 2, 1945. Naval Air Technical Arsenal, Yokosuka, Japan. The smell hit me first. Not gasoline, not oil. Something sharper, more violent. Hydrogen peroxide and hydrazine, the fuel mixture that would either propel a man to glory or vaporize him in midair. I stood in the dim hangar, staring at the thing they called Ohka, cherry blossom, though the Americans would later name it something else entirely, something crueler, Baka, idiot. It didn't look like an aircraft. It looked like a coffin with wings. 22 feet long, 16 feet across at the wingtips. No landing gear, no ejection seat, just a cramped cockpit barely wide enough for a man's shoulders, a stick, a simple compass, and 3 Type 4 Model 20 rocket motors mounted in the tail. 1,200 kilograms of trinitroanisole explosive packed into the nose. The engineers told me the rockets would burn for only 9 seconds. 9 seconds of thrust producing 800 kilograms each. 9 seconds to reach 650 kilometers per hour in a dive. 9 seconds to become unstoppable. I watched Lieutenant Hiroshi Kuroki climb into the cockpit during the morning test. He was 23 years old. His hands didn't shake as he pulled the canopy closed, but I saw his eyes through the glass, wide, unblinking, like a man staring into a tunnel with no light at the end. The ground crew stepped back. The mother bomber, a Mitsubishi G4M2E Betty, sat waiting on the tarmac, its belly modified to carry this weapon beneath it like some grotesque birth. The plan was elegant in its brutality. The Betty would carry the Ohka to within 20 miles of the target, an American carrier, a battleship, anything large enough to justify the exchange. At altitude, the pilot would release. The Ohka would glide, silent and invisible on radar, until the final moment. Then the pilot would ignite the rockets. Then he would aim for the ship's elevator, the fuel stores, the magazine. Then he would vanish into fire and metal and purpose. I had studied the American reports we'd intercepted. They were terrified of our Zeros, our kamikazes. But this was different. This was engineered suicide, precision death. The Americans had nothing like it. Their pilots bailed out, parachuted to safety, lived to fight again. Our pilots were the weapon itself. March 21, 1945, USS Karamaretto, Okinawa Campaign. The first operational mission launched from Kanoya Air Base. 18 Betty bombers, each carrying an Ohka. I wasn't there, but I heard the reports afterward. The formation never reached the target. American Hellcats from the USS Hornet intercepted them 60 miles out. The Bettys, slow and heavy with their burden, became easy prey. 15 shot down, 55 men dead, not one Ohka released. But then came March 28th. The destroyer USS Manert El Abele was on radar picket duty off Okinawa. The Betty approached low, hugging the waves. It released the Ohka at 13,000 feet. Petty Officer Saburo Dohi ignited his rockets. The American gunners saw it too late, a black dart screaming out of the sky at impossible speed, faster than anything they'd ever tracked. The 5-inch guns couldn't track it. The 40mm couldn't lead it. It struck the starboard side below the waterline. The explosion broke the destroyer in half. She sank in 4 minutes. 79 men went down with her. The Americans pulled survivors from the water. They found fragments, twisted metal, burnt wood, pieces of a rocket motor, and something else. Part of a cockpit, part of a seat, part of a man. May 10th, 1945. Naval Air Station, NAS, Alameda, California. I was assigned to the Naval Technical Mission to Japan, though the war was still grinding on. We'd captured an intact Ohka on Okinawa after a Betty made an emergency landing. The pilot had abandoned it before we arrived. Smart man. We shipped it back to California in pieces, reassembled it in a secured hangar under armed guard. The brass wanted answers. How did it work? How fast could it really go? Could we defend against it? I stood beside Commander Harold Estes, a test pilot who'd flown everything from Corsairs to captured German Me-163 Comets. He circled the Ohka slowly, running his hand along the fuselage. The metal was thin, riveted by hand, painted in fading green camouflage. Crude, desperate, brilliant. "No radio," he muttered. "No instruments except a compass and an altimeter. How did they aim?" I said, "They didn't aim. They became the aim." He looked at the cockpit, the seat barely padded, the canopy bolted shut from the outside. "Jesus Christ, they locked them in?" I nodded. Once the mothership released them, there was no going back. Glide or die, dive or die. The rockets were one way. Estes crouched near the tail, examining the rocket nozzles. These burn hypergolic fuel, hydrogen peroxide and hydrazine. Ignition on contact, no spark plug, no starter, just chemistry and faith. And speed, I added. In testing, they estimated terminal velocity at 650 kilometers per hour. Some reports say faster. Nothing we have can intercept it in a powered dive, not reliably. He stood, wiping his hands on his flight suit. His face had gone pale. "They built a manned missile? Not a plane, a missile." "Yes." "And we're supposed to test fly this thing?" I met his eyes. "No. We're supposed to understand it, so it never happens again." May 12, 1945, Wright Field, Ohio. We transported the Ohka to Wright Field for wind tunnel analysis and engine testing. The engineers mounted it on a test rig in the propulsion lab, hooked up instrumentation, piped in the fuel. I watched from behind reinforced glass as they prepared for a static rocket ignition. The fuel lines hissed, the chamber pressurized. Someone counted down. 3, 2, 1. The rockets ignited with a sound like ripping fabric amplified 1,000 times. A white-hot jet of flame shot 15 feet across the test cell. The whole building shook. The noise was unbearable, not the roar of a piston engine or even a turbojet, but something sharper, angrier, a scream of pure chemical rage. It burned for 9 seconds. Then silence. Smoke. The smell of burnt metal and something sour, something wrong. One of the engineers, a young captain named Dalton, pulled off his headset. His hands were shaking. "That's not propulsion. That's barely controlled detonation." "And someone rode that," Estes said quietly. We stood in the observation room long after the test ended, staring at the Ohka. It sat on the rig, scorched and silent, its rockets dark. I thought of Lieutenant Kuroki. I thought of Petty Officer Dohi. I thought of the 79 men on the Abele who never saw it coming. "Why would they do it?" Dalton asked, though he wasn't really asking. "Because they believed, and because we gave them no other choice." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that cockpit, the bolted canopy, the 9-second burn, the terminal dive. I kept thinking about what it must have felt like in those final moments, the acceleration, the noise, the ship growing larger in the windscreen, the inability to turn back, to bail out, to do anything but finish what you started. May 15th, 1945, Wright Field, Ohio. We were scheduled to dismantle the Ohka the next morning,
Full teardown. Measure every component, photograph every weld, document every system. Standard procedure for captured enemy equipment. I arrived early, before the rest of the team. The hangar was dark except for a single work light over the test rig. The Ohka sat there, silent and waiting. I walked closer, drawn by something I couldn't name. Morbid curiosity, professional duty, something else. I climbed onto the rig and looked into the cockpit. The seat was stained, sweat, maybe oil, maybe blood. The stick was worn smooth where hands had gripped it. There was something scratched into the metal panel beside the compass. Japanese characters. I didn't read Japanese well, but I recognized the strokes. Tenro Heika Bonsai. Long live the Emperor.
I stepped back, suddenly cold despite the California heat. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a tomb, a prayer, a final act of faith in a cause that was already lost. I was about to leave when I noticed something. The canopy release, the mechanism we'd assumed was locked from the outside. It wasn't locked. It was jammed, bent inward, as if someone had tried to open it from the inside and failed. Someone had tried to escape. My blood went cold. I stared at that bent metal, at the scratches around the latch, and suddenly the Ohka wasn't a symbol anymore. It wasn't a marvel of desperate engineering or a testament to fanatical devotion. It was a coffin, and the man inside had realized it too late.
May 16, 1945, Wright Field, Ohio. I told Commander Estes about the canopy. We stood in his office, the morning sun cutting harsh lines across his desk. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tight. When I finished, he opened a folder and slid a document across to me. Intercepted Japanese communications, translated by Naval Intelligence, dated April 1945. "Read the highlighted section," he said. I scanned down. My stomach turned. Ohka pilots report mechanical failures in canopy release mechanisms. Several units returned to base unable to deploy. Request immediate inspection and repair of all Model 11 units prior to next operation. Emphasis: canopy must open reliably for pilot morale. Pilot morale. Not pilot survival. Morale. Because even the engineers knew that opening the canopy mid-flight in an Ohka meant nothing. There was no parachute that could deploy at 600 kilometers per hour. No altitude low enough to bail out safely once the dive began. The canopy release was theater, a psychological comfort, a lie. "They knew," I said quietly. "The designers knew." Estes nodded. "And the pilots knew too. They had to. But they flew anyway." I thought about that bent metal, those scratch marks, the man who tried to open a door that was never meant to save him. Why would they? "Because," Estes interrupted, "when your entire culture tells you that death with purpose is the highest honor, and surrender is the deepest shame, you don't question the canopy release. You just hope you won't need it." He closed the folder. "We're not dismantling it. Washington wants it intact. They're sending it to the Smithsonian after the war. Public display. Let the American people see what we were up against." "A museum piece," I said bitterly. "A warning." May 20th, 1945, classified briefing, Pentagon. I was summoned to Washington to brief a joint Army-Navy committee on the Ohka analysis. Generals, admirals, intelligence officers, men with stars on their shoulders and cold calculation in their eyes. I presented the technical data, speed, fuel composition, explosive payload, operational range. I showed them photographs of the cockpit, the rocket motors, the impact damage on the Abili. I spoke in measured, professional terms. Then Admiral Chester Nimitz asked the question that changed everything. "Could we build one?" The room went silent. I looked at him, searching for irony, for moral hesitation. I found neither. "Sir?
Could we build an American version, a guided bomb with a pilot, one-way mission, volunteers only? Think of the strategic value. Kamikaze attacks against Japanese fortifications, bridges, command centers. No need for precision bombing, no risk of missing. Just aim and deliver. I felt the air leave the room. Every eye was on me. Technically, yes, I said slowly. The engineering is crude but effective. We have better materials, better engines. We could make it faster, more reliable, more lethal. Then why shouldn't we? I looked down at my notes, at the photographs of the Ohka cockpit, at the scratched characters, Tenno Heika Banzai. I thought about the bent canopy latch, the man who tried to open a door that was never meant to save him. Because the moment we ask our pilots to become ammunition, we lose the moral authority to say we're the good guys. Nimitz stared at me. The room remained silent. The Japanese built the Ohka out of desperation. They had no other options, no air superiority, no fuel, no time. They turned men into missiles because missiles were cheaper than men. But we're not desperate. We're winning. And if we win by adopting their methods, what exactly have we won? Nimitz leaned back. After a long moment, he nodded. Thank you, Lieutenant. You're dismissed. I left the Pentagon that day not knowing if I'd ended my career or saved my soul. July 10th, 1945, Naval Technical Mission, occupied Japan. The war dragged on, though everyone knew it was over. We landed in Japan as part of the occupation force, tasked with cataloging captured equipment and interrogating engineers. I requested assignment to the Yokosuka arsenal, where the Ohka had been designed. The facility was gutted, bombed, burned, looted, but in a basement archive I found blueprints, design notes, test reports, and something else, a journal, handwritten in Japanese. I had it translated. It belonged to Commander Motoharu Okamura, the officer who conceived the Ohka program. The entries were clinical at first, thrust calculations, weight distributions, fuel efficiency. But as the dates progressed, the tone changed. March 1945. We have lost too many pilots in conventional attacks. The Ohka gives them purpose, a guaranteed hit, a noble death. April 1945. I visited Kanoya Air Base. I watched the pilots climb into their aircraft. They sang. They smiled. I wonder if they know. I wonder if I should tell them. May 1945. The war is lost. Everyone knows this, even if no one says it. But we continue. We build more Ohkas. We train more pilots. Because to stop now would be to admit that the deaths were meaningless, and we cannot allow them to be meaningless. The final entry was dated August 6, 1945. The day the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima. We created a weapon that required men to die. America created a weapon that required no one to die at all. They win not because they are stronger, but because they value life more than honor. I do not know if we were brave or foolish. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither matters. I closed the journal. Outside, the ruins of Yokosuka smoldered under a gray sky. Somewhere in the distance, a child was crying. September 2nd, 1945. USS Missouri, Tokyo Bay. Japan surrendered. I stood on the deck of the Missouri with thousands of other servicemen watching the delegation sign the instruments. General MacArthur spoke of peace and reconciliation. The ceremony was dignified, almost gentle. But I kept thinking about the Ohka, about the pilots who never returned, about the engineers who designed a weapon with no escape, about Commander Okamura's journal, about the bent canopy latch. After the ceremony, I found Estes on the fantail, smoking a cigarette. We stood in silence for a while, watching the sunset over Tokyo Bay. You think they'll remember? The Ohka pilots, the Abili, all of it? For a while, I said.
Then it'll become a footnote, a curiosity, something strange and terrible from a strange and terrible time. Good, he said. Some things should be forgotten. But I knew better. Some things can't be forgotten because they're not really about the past. They're about the choice to turn men into weapons or to find another way, the choice to value victory over humanity or humanity over victory. November 1945, Smithsonian Institution, Washington, D.C. They installed the Ohka in a new exhibit, Captured Enemy Aircraft of World War II. I attended the opening, standing in the back of the crowd as a curator explained the weapon's history, its operational record, its technical specifications. He spoke in the detached language of museums, dates, numbers, facts. But he didn't mention the canopy latch. He didn't mention Commander Okamura's journal. He didn't mention the scratch marks or the bent metal or the man who tried to open a door that was never meant to save him. I approached the display after the crowd dispersed. The Ohka hung from wires, suspended in mid-dive, frozen forever in its final attack. Clean, restored, impressive. I reached up and touched the fuselage. The metal was cold. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, tugged his parent's sleeve. "Dad, why did they do it? Why did they fly something with no way out?" The father glanced at the placard, then shrugged. "I guess they just believed in something more than themselves." I wanted to correct him, to tell him about the desperation, the propaganda, the lies, to explain that belief without choice isn't belief at all, it's coercion, that honor without survival is just death with better branding. But I stayed silent. Because maybe the boy was right. Maybe they did believe. And maybe that belief, however misguided, however tragic, deserved to be remembered not as foolishness, but as a warning that the human capacity for sacrifice is infinite, but the reasons we ask for sacrifice should never be taken lightly. I left the museum as the lights dimmed. The Ohka remained, suspended in the dark, a relic of a war that demanded everything and gave nothing back.
Somewhere, in a cemetery outside Yokosuka, Lieutenant Hiroshi Kuroki's name is carved on a memorial stone. No grave, no body, just a name and a date. He was 23 years old when he climbed into that cockpit. He would have been 24 when the war ended. He never got the chance to find out.